You had a dream last night. Maybe you don't remember it anymore, maybe it's already gone, dissolved the moment your alarm went off. But for a few seconds, right when you woke up, some part of it was still there. A feeling, an image, a person who shouldn't have been in that room but somehow made perfect sense while you were asleep. Most people treat that as noise. Random static the brain produces while it's busy doing something else, filing memories, resetting for the day, nothing worth taking seriously. Carl Jung spent decades disagreeing with that idea, and not as a mystic making unfounded claims, but as a psychiatrist who kept detailed records of thousands of dreams, his own and his patients', looking for a pattern serious enough to build an entire method of treatment on. What he found was that dreams aren't random at all. They're closer to a message sent from a part of yourself that doesn't have access to your waking vocabulary, and has to communicate the only way it can, through image, symbol, and feeling instead of plain language. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your dreams speak in that strange, symbolic code instead of just telling you directly what's going on, and how to actually start listening to what they're saying, without needing a dream dictionary or a mystical framework you don't believe in. This isn't about predicting the future or decoding hidden messages from the universe. It's about something more grounded and more useful, treating your own unconscious mind as a source of real information about yourself, information that often arrives in your dreams before it ever becomes clear to you while you're awake. Jung's interest in dreams didn't start as an abstract theory. It started with Sigmund Freud, whose early work on dream interpretation Jung studied closely before the two eventually broke apart professionally and personally. Freud believed dreams were mostly disguised wish fulfillment, usually sexual in nature, dressed up in symbols specifically to sneak past the mind's internal censor. Jung respected the insight that dreams carried meaning, but he came to see Freud's framework as too narrow, forcing every dream through the same interpretive lens regardless of what was actually happening in a person's life. Jung's own view, developed over decades of clinical work, was broader and in some ways more practical. Dreams weren't disguising something shameful. They were compensating for something missing. In Jung's model, the conscious mind, the part of you making decisions, holding opinions, presenting itself to the world, only ever has a partial view of who you actually are. Whatever gets left out of that conscious picture, suppressed emotions, unacknowledged needs, undeveloped potential, doesn't just disappear. It keeps existing in the unconscious, and it looks for ways to be heard. Dreams, in Jung's model, are one of the most direct channels available for that communication, precisely because the conscious mind's usual filters are switched off while you sleep. That's why a dream will often feel emotionally intense even when the actual content seems mundane or bizarre. The emotional charge isn't about the literal images on the surface, a coworker, an unfamiliar house, a car that won't start. It's about what those images are standing in for, material your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet, using the nearest available symbol to make itself known. If this is helping you see your own dreams differently already, subscribe now, because this channel breaks down one piece of Jung's work every week, always explained clearly and applied to something real. Jung kept this kind of record himself, for years, particularly during the period following his break with Freud, when his own dream life became unusually intense and, by his own account, occasionally disturbing. Rather than dismiss what he was experiencing, he treated it as data, the same way he treated his patients' dreams, looking for the pattern underneath the strange surface details instead of taking the imagery at face value. That personal practice eventually shaped the clinical method he developed for working with patients. Instead of imposing a fixed interpretation on every symbol, Jung insisted on asking each dreamer what a particular image meant to them personally, since the same symbol, a snake, a house, a stranger, could carry completely different weight depending on the dreamer's own history and associations. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If your unconscious mind has something important to tell you, why doesn't it just say it plainly? Why the strange houses, the people who are somehow also other people, the anxiety about a test you haven't taken in 20 years? Jung's answer was that the unconscious doesn't think in language the way the conscious mind does. It thinks in image, association, and feeling, the same raw material that existed before language ever developed, both in each individual person's early childhood and, Jung argued, across the broader history of the human species. Symbol isn't a disguise the unconscious puts on to hide its message. It's simply the unconscious mind's native tongue. This is why trying to translate a dream symbol using a fixed, universal dictionary, where a snake always means one specific thing, or water always represents exactly the same emotion, tends to fail so often. Jung was explicit about this limitation. A symbol's meaning depends heavily on the personal associations the dreamer brings to it. A dog might represent comfort and loyalty to someone who grew up with a beloved pet, and represent real danger to someone who was bitten as a child. Same image, completely different emotional content, depending entirely on the dreamer's own history. That's also why dream dictionaries, the kind that assign one fixed meaning to every symbol regardless of who's dreaming, tend to miss the point of Jung's actual method entirely. The real work isn't looking up an answer. It's asking yourself honestly what that specific image makes you feel, and where else in your life you felt something similar recently. There's a reason this personal association approach tends to feel more accurate than a generic symbol dictionary, even to people encountering it for the first time. A dictionary can only ever offer you the average interpretation across thousands of different dreamers, stripped of the specific texture of your own life. Jung's method asks a slower, more deliberate question instead. Not what does this symbol mean in general, but what has this specific image meant, historically, inside your own particular history? Before we get to the more famous, more debated part of Jung's dream theory, it's worth understanding the simpler layer first, what he called the personal unconscious. This is the part of your unconscious mind built entirely out of your own individual experience. Memories you've forgotten consciously, but that are still stored somewhere. Emotions you never fully processed. Needs you learned early to suppress in order to be accepted by the people around you. Most dreams, in Jung's clinical experience, draw heavily on this personal material first. A dream about being unprepared for an exam often isn't really about school at all. It's frequently about a current situation where you feel similarly unprepared, evaluated, or exposed. A dream about a childhood home that no longer exists might be surfacing feelings about safety or belonging that a current life change has quietly stirred up, without you consciously connecting the two. The personal unconscious also holds what Jung would later connect to the shadow, material about yourself you've pushed out of conscious awareness because, at some point, it felt unacceptable to acknowledge. Dreams involving conflict with a stranger, an intruder in your home, or an aggressive figure chasing you, often trace back to disowned parts of your own personality, not external threats. The unconscious mind, working through dream imagery, sometimes shows you exactly the trait you've spent your waking life refusing to admit you have. This is why a useful first question for almost any dream is simply this: what was I feeling right before this dream, in the day or two leading up to it? Dreams rarely arrive completely disconnected from your waking life. They usually pick up a thread your conscious mind dropped, sometimes deliberately, sometimes just because you didn't have time to sit with a feeling that showed up during an ordinary Tuesday. Here's where Jung's theory goes further than almost anyone before him was willing to go. Beyond the personal unconscious, built from your own individual life, Jung proposed a deeper layer he called the collective unconscious, a layer of the mind he believed was shared, structurally, across all of humanity, regardless of culture, era, or individual experience. This isn't a claim that everyone has access to the same specific memories. It's a claim that certain patterns, certain recurring images and story structures, what Jung called archetypes, show up across radically different cultures and time periods with a consistency that's hard to explain purely through cultural transmission. The wise old figure offering guidance, the threatening pursuer, the nurturing mother, the perilous journey into darkness followed by a return transformed. These patterns appear in myths, religious stories, and fairy tales from societies that had no contact with each other. And Jung argued they show up just as reliably in dreams. When a dream feels unusually vivid, unusually significant, almost mythic in tone, larger and more emotionally weighty than an ordinary dream about being late for work, Jung suggested that might be a signal you've touched something closer to this collective layer, an archetypal pattern surfacing through your own personal dream imagery. These dreams tend to stay with people for years, sometimes decades, in a way that ordinary dreams simply don't. You don't need to fully accept Jung's stronger claims about a literally shared unconscious across humanity to find this idea useful. Even treated more modestly, as a description of recurring symbolic patterns that show up across cultures, it offers a helpful way to notice which of your dreams feel personal and specific, and which feel like they're tapping into something bigger and more universal. It's worth being honest that this particular part of Jung's theory remains genuinely contested, even among psychologists sympathetic to the rest of his work. Whether archetypes are literally inherited, or simply reflect patterns that emerge naturally whenever humans everywhere face the same basic life experiences, birth, death, danger, belonging, is still debated. What tends to hold up regardless of which explanation you find more convincing is the practical observation itself. Certain dream images really do carry a weight and consistency that ordinary, purely personal symbols don't. If there's one category of dream that almost everyone has experienced, and almost everyone finds unsettling, it's the recurring dream, the one that comes back, sometimes for years, sometimes with slight variations, but always circling the same core scenario. Being chased, losing teeth, showing up somewhere unprepared, discovering an entire unused room in a house you've lived in for years. Jung's model offers a fairly direct explanation for why these dreams keep returning. The unconscious material behind them hasn't been resolved yet. A recurring dream in this framework isn't a glitch or a random repetition. It's closer to a message being sent again and again because it hasn't been received or acted on the first several dozen times. This is particularly true of dreams involving an unused or newly discovered room in a familiar house, one of the more common recurring dream patterns people report. Jung would often interpret this kind of dream as pointing toward unrealized potential, some capacity or interest that exists within the dreamer but has never been developed or given space in their actual life. The house represents the self. The undiscovered room represents a part of that self still waiting to be explored. Recurring dreams about being chased, similarly, often point back to something the dreamer is avoiding in waking life, not necessarily a literal threat, but an issue, a decision, or an uncomfortable truth about themselves they keep running from instead of turning to face. Jung's patients would sometimes report that these chased dreams changed, or stopped entirely, once they consciously confronted whatever they'd been avoiding. A pattern consistent enough that Jung came to treat it as one of the more reliable diagnostic signals in his clinical work. There's a practical test worth trying with any recurring dream. Instead of asking what the dream means in the abstract, ask what would happen if, within the dream itself, you turned around and faced whatever was chasing you, or opened the door to the unused room instead of walking past it again. Some of Jung's patients, working with this kind of dream over time, reported that simply imagining that confrontation while awake, rehearsing it deliberately, eventually changed how the dream itself unfolded the next time it appeared. Jung made a distinction that's useful for anyone trying to take their own dreams seriously without becoming obsessive about every single one. Not all dreams carry equal weight. Most dreams, in his view, process the ordinary residue of daily life, minor and largely forgettable. But occasionally a dream arrives that feels categorically different, what Jung called a big dream, carrying an emotional and symbolic intensity that sets it apart immediately from ordinary dream material. People tend to know a big dream when they have one, even without any theoretical framework. It's the dream you still remember in vivid detail years later. The one that felt, even while you were having it, like it meant something important, before you had any idea what that something was. Jung's patients often brought these specific dreams into sessions unprompted, sensing intuitively that they mattered more than the usual dream content, even when they couldn't yet explain why. These big dreams, Jung found, often arrive during major life transitions, a significant loss, a career change, the approach of a decision that will meaningfully alter the direction of someone's life. It's as though the unconscious mobilizes more of its symbolic resources precisely when the stakes of waking life increase, offering guidance, warning, or perspective at exactly the moments a person most needs it, whether or not they're consciously aware of needing anything at all. Learning to distinguish a big dream from an ordinary one isn't about a formal checklist. It's mostly about trusting the intensity of your own reaction. If a dream stays with you for days, if you find yourself still turning it over in your mind long after waking, that persistence itself is usually the clearest sign that it's worth paying closer attention to. So how do you actually start applying any of this to your own dream life? Jung's own clinical method offers a few concrete practices, and you can start using them tonight. First, keep a notebook by your bed and write down whatever you remember the moment you wake up, before you check your phone, before you get out of bed, before the details start dissolving. Dream memory fades remarkably fast, often within the first few minutes of waking, so the window for capturing it accurately is much shorter than most people expect. Second, don't worry about capturing a complete narrative. Fragments, single images, a specific feeling with no clear story attached are all worth writing down. Some of the most useful material in Jung's own clinical notes came from partial dream fragments, not fully formed stories. Third, for each significant image in the dream, ask yourself directly what that image reminds you of, what feeling it produces, and where else in your recent life you felt something similar. This is the core of Jung's method, sometimes called amplification, treating each symbol as a personal question rather than looking for a universal answer in a book. Fourth, pay attention to the emotional tone of the dream more than the literal plot. A dream about a mundane task like organizing files or cleaning a house that carries intense anxiety is telling you something through that anxiety, regardless of how ordinary the surface content looks. The feeling is often more diagnostic than the storyline. None of this requires formal training in dream analysis. It requires consistency and a willingness to treat your own unconscious material as worth taking seriously, rather than dismissing it the moment you're fully awake and the dream starts to feel embarrassing or irrelevant in the light of day. Over time, a pattern tends to emerge across weeks and months of consistent recording, certain symbols returning, certain emotional tones repeating across otherwise unrelated dreams. That pattern, more than any single dream interpreted in isolation, is usually where the most useful insight actually lives. It helps to reread old entries periodically, not just add new ones. A symbol that seemed meaningless in isolation 3 months ago often connects clearly to something happening in your life right now, once you can see it alongside a dozen other entries instead of on its own. The value of the notebook isn't really in any single night's entry. It's in the pattern that only becomes visible once you've collected enough of them to compare. Jung eventually developed a more advanced practice, one that went beyond simply recording and reflecting on dreams after the fact, what he called active imagination. Rather than waiting passively for the unconscious to speak through sleep, active imagination involved deliberately engaging with dream images, or with the feelings a dream had stirred up, while fully awake, treating them almost like a conversation partner rather than a puzzle to be solved from a distance. In practice, this might mean returning in a relaxed and unhurried state to a specific dream image, a threatening figure, a strange landscape, an object that seemed important, and simply staying with it, noticing what it does next in your imagination without forcing a particular outcome or trying to control the direction it takes. Jung treated this less as fantasy and more as a genuine, structured dialogue with material the unconscious was actively trying to communicate. This practice takes real discipline to do well, and Jung himself warned that it wasn't something to approach carelessly, particularly for people already dealing with significant psychological distress, since it involves deliberately lowering some of the usual boundaries between conscious and unconscious material. For most people, though in a gentler form, it can simply mean sitting with a dream image for a few minutes longer than usual, asking it, almost like a question directed at another person, what it wants, or why it showed up now. The goal isn't to receive a literal answer in words. It's to notice what arises, an unexpected memory, a shift in feeling, a new detail in the image itself, and treat that as information worth taking seriously, the same way you take seriously something an actual person told you about themselves in conversation. Jung's own patients described this process differently depending on their temperament. Some found it came naturally, almost like extending a daydream deliberately in one direction instead of letting it wander. Others found it took real practice before anything beyond simple visualization occurred. Either experience was considered valid within Jung's method. The value wasn't in producing a dramatic internal encounter every time. It was in building the habit of taking your own unconscious material seriously enough to sit with it, instead of dismissing it the moment you opened your eyes. If you've watched this channel before, you might recognize where this is heading. Dream work in Jung's model isn't a separate, isolated practice. It's one of the most direct tools available for individuation, the lifelong process of becoming acquainted with the fuller version of yourself, the parts the persona speaks over, the shadow material you've disowned, and the potential you haven't yet developed. Dreams, precisely because they bypass the conscious mind's usual filters, often reveal exactly the material individuation work is trying to reach through more deliberate waking methods. A recurring dream about an unused room might point toward the same undeveloped potential you'd eventually uncover through months of conscious reflection. except the dream got there faster, because it didn't have to argue past your ego's usual defenses first. This is why Jung considered consistent attention to dream life not a mystical side practice, but a core part of serious psychological work. The unconscious in his model isn't hostile or working against you. It's attempting, patiently and repeatedly, to bring your conscious awareness into better balance, correcting for whatever one-sidedness your waking personality has developed over years of favoring certain traits and suppressing others. Treated this way, your dream life stops being strange, unrelated noise happening to you passively every night, and starts becoming something closer to an ongoing report from a part of yourself that's been paying close attention the whole time, even when you weren't. Your dreams were never really random. They're the most direct, least filtered channel your unconscious mind has for reaching you, speaking in the only language it's ever known, image, symbol, and feeling, instead of the plain sentences your conscious mind prefers. You don't need to believe every claim Jung made about a collective unconscious shared across humanity to take this seriously. Even treated modestly, as a record of what your own mind is quietly processing beneath the surface, your dreams are worth more attention than most people ever give them. If this helped you look at your own dream life a little differently, subscribe, because next week we're looking at another piece of Jung's work, one about the specific moment adulthood usually arrives, and why so many people miss it entirely. And before you go, what's a dream that stayed with you longer than it should have, one you still think about, even years later? Leave it in the comments. You might be closer to understanding it than you think. Jung spent a lifetime treating dreams not as noise to be filtered out, but as some of the most honest material the human mind ever produces, precisely because it arrives before the ego has a chance to edit it into something more comfortable. That's not a small thing to have access to, every single night, whether or not you've ever thought to pay attention.